And this is Protofeeder's Timeline of Infiltration, Part 5. We are on the 1900s now, so let's look. Up till now, we've seen that infiltration goes back, thousands of years back to the Arthashastra in ancient India, which instructed rulers or kings or princes, whatever, to install various informants, various undercover operatives in the form of beggars, magicians, priests, any manner of people to get the populace to kind of snitch on themselves and to entrap them, as we say. Then we saw in ancient China, the Tang Dynasty, the 什么 Jini Wei ma. We saw in the Eastern Depot, we saw there was informants back then, and they would do the same thing. They would get people to snitch. They would find out plots against the emperor and all this stuff. Same thing in ancient Rome. We saw the quotes from Epictetus, and I forgot the other one, but talking about how in ancient Rome there were people who would get you to talk ill of the government, and then they would arrest you. And in ancient Rome, there was constant talk of revolution. So now we're in the 1800s, or the 1900s. So we've already seen, starting with the French Revolution, the English government used its officials to monitor the activities of French revolutionaries and to undermine the French Revolution. And then moving further, we saw that the monitoring of French revolutionaries was then combined with the monitoring and infiltration of Irish nationalists, who were called Fenians at that time. So let's look here. Here, timeline. Oh, right here. Okay. All right. So then we saw from the French Revolution, that was the birth of all these ideas of having a revolution to form a nation state, to form a democracy, to form a republic. Well, then we go into the 1840s after the French Revolution, about 40 years, 50 years later, we see that now the opposition is to the bourgeoisie itself and the extermination of class society. And we see that Marx was infiltrated, that the government was monitoring. Oh, these are quotes. Hold on. So we see that the government was monitoring. No, that's my book of poetry. My book of poetry coming out soon. Here we go. The government was monitoring the Irish and anarchists and labor organizers and communists and socialists. And then we saw that also the formation of private groups. The Pinkerton was the main one, but we'll see others. So now we're at the 1900s. So now, up to this point, from the 1840s to the 1900s, those 60 years, there's been a constant spread of radical ideas, the overthrow of class society, assassinations, and we've seen various government agencies infiltrating these movements. Well, now we're in the 1900s. So, biggest thing, 1901. This guy, what do we think that is? Jolgosz. He was a Czech national, I believe. He assassinated McKinley, and there is some correspondence between him and Emma Goldman, and so he was loosely connected to anarchist movements, but he was kind of described as a loner. So it's not really clear, he there at that time there was anarchist so-called terrorism, assassinations, bombs, but a lot of it was instigated by the police. So that was a big thing, and at that time, Theodore Roosevelt was vice president, and he said we need to kill every anarchist. Basically, we need to destroy anarchism. So again, when they tell you this is wokeism, this is Antifa, it's a temporary phenomena. This has been going on for over 100 years now. Okay, so then we see 1902 from the U.S. We go to Russia. So far, first of all, sorry, Jolgosz, he was protesting. He was assassinating McKinley in protest of imperialism and capitalism. And I believe when he killed McKinley, he mentioned the U.S. Occupation of the Philippines. And today, the U.S. has military bases in the Philippines, and it's a semi-colony. It's an unofficial colony of the U.S. So what I want you guys to understand is that on the left, we do have a tradition of understanding history, of accepting history, whereas on the right, they have to recreate their history every day. So 1902, now we're back in Russia. We have Malinovsky. He begins informing for the Okhrana. He joins the Petersburg Metal Workers Union. So we saw this again with, I forgot the guy's name, another spy joining the union to get information. So the unions are infiltrated. So he joins the Metal Workers Union and the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Okay. He was arrested 5 times for union activism, but the Okhrana got him out. This is a key point, you guys. When we're dealing with confidential informants, when we're dealing with snitches, people that go to the authorities or are coerced by the authorities to informing, there's going to be a pattern where they get away with their crimes. They plead guilty, they serve no time. They do something fucked up, but they get out of it. It's always something to watch out for, comrades. You can look up people's court records, you can do background checks and see who they are. And if you see all these arrests for stuff that should be arrestable and they serve no time, or should be a sentence but they serve no time, that's suspect. Okay, so here we go. So he starts in 1902, starts informing. In 1910, he goes to Moscow, where he begins receiving a regular salary from the Okhrana. Okay, so these guys make money. We're going to see what this guy from Black Lives Matter, or who was infiltrating Black Lives Matter in Denver, Colorado, he goes to the FBI and intentionally says, "I want to snitch on Black Lives Matter." Okay, so it's good money. I don't, I guess at this point, his handlers instruct him to work to make sure that the RSDLP doesn't unite and stays factioned up. Here we come in with Lenin. See, the Russian Revolution, 1917, we're in 1910 already. So again, we see the Okhrana wants these revolutionaries to stay split up. So this is why sometimes the people I'm dealing with on Instagram, their behavior is like cops or informants or whatever, and a lot of times it does seem they want to sow dissent. So in 1903, the party had split into Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. We all know in the Russian Revolution, Lenin led the Bolsheviks. Trotsky at first was with the Mensheviks. Bolsheviks here means minority. Bolsheviks is majority. Mensheviks is minority, whatever. So they split. And yeah, so Mensheviks implies the minority. They were actually the majority until the Russian Revolution. Okay, so in 1912, Malinovsky goes to Prague, where Lenin led the revolution Bolsheviks to break with the Mensheviks and start their own Bolshevik organization. So the thing is that we idolize Lenin as a leader and Marx and Mao's leaders, but we have to look at their material context, their concrete social relationships, and the context that they were thinking in. Just like we have to look at our own class context and the way that we arrive at our thoughts, because we're not lone bourgeois individuals. So there's a likelihood that Lenin was being influenced to be so divisive, so insistent. There's a likelihood that he was influenced by the Okhrana, because the Okhrana wanted these revolutionaries to split and to fight each other. So when we talk about leftist infighting, guys, it's also the feds. Okay, Lenin was impressed with Malinovsky. He put him on the Bolshevik Central Committee. So that's another thing. These guys are committed to showing you they're down for the cause. So you see somebody that's down for the cause, you have to look into their background. You can't just assume, oh my God, he quoted Marx, he quoted Bell Hooks, oh, he's a male ally or whatever the fuck. No, look into the background, find their story, look for who they are, look for why they're in the movement. So Lenin puts him on the Bolshevik Central Committee, sends him to represent the Bolsheviks in the Duma, that's in Russia, in the Russian parliament. Malinovsky at that time became the highest paid Okhrana agent, making more than the imperial director of police. So I don't know what the equivalent is. He's like making more than Kash Patel, basically. Among his committee, it seems 2 other members were Okhrana agents. That's the other thing Poet of Theater wants you to remember, comrades. These guys never work alone. If you're being infiltrated, you might have a confidential informant who doesn't know that they're also working in conjunction with other confidential informants because they're not told. This happened with the Black Panthers, as we'll see. So during his time, he helped various Bolsheviks into exile in Serbia, including Stalin. So these agents are helping, they're participating in the movement. They're not, sometimes they'll go there just to disrupt, just to sow confusion, but then sometimes they'll stay, because the more access they have to the movement, the more information they can give to their officers, their handlers, and then those handlers can use other agents and other means to influence the movement. You get me? So this is like an orchestration. We have to stop thinking in terms of heroes and villains. This is coordinated. This is organization, okay? So in 1912, he recommends that Lenin appoint Miron Cheromazov, who is also an Okhrana agent, to be editor of Pravda. Pravda is the famous USSR Soviet Union newspaper. In 1913, uh, Malinowski reports the plan of Sverdlov and Stalin to escape exile, which made him the only Bolshevik leader not in exile. So he snitched out on Sverdlov and Stalin. So in the end, he was found out. After the Bolsheviks took power after the Russian Revolution in 1918, he was given a trial and executed. Okay? So what happened was when the Russians, we'll get to that later, but when the Russians take over, the Bolsheviks take over in the Russian Revolution, they go into the Okhrana offices and they end up finding out all this information, releasing information, but then they also use those Okhrana officers to create their own intelligence agency, which becomes the NKVD and then the KGB. So from Russia, we were in America with McKinley's assassination by an anarchist over imperialism and capitalism. Now we just saw the Okhrana infiltrating the Russian revolutionaries. Now in 1903, homie, the UK, Emmeline Pankhurst founds Women's Social and Political Unity, a woman-only group to fight for women's suffrage. Now you guys should study them because the cops wanted to stop these women too, and they were all middle-class ladies, right? And so they were more creative. I have to say they were very slick because women, in this case, I don't want to generalize because, we all get played, but women are less trying to prove themselves, a little more intuitive and a little more focused on communication, intuition, and emotional safety. So there's a lot of, I don't know if I have it in here, there's a lot of good tales of how the women's suffrage movement outsmarted the cops. They were very tricky. Okay. But so that's the other thing, right? Women's suffrage. Now we're getting to the feminists, right? So you see feminists, anarchists, Irish nationalists, right? And we know that with the potential for slave revolts, there was constant incentive during the times of slavery to for slaves to inform on each other, rat each other out, stop the slave revolt, stop the murder of the master. And we're going to see in 1920 it continues. So that's the African American community, feminism, the Irish, the unions, the anarchist socialists, and communists. So again, comrades, we see all this propaganda on TV, the Born Identity, Mission Impossible, James Bond, all this bullshit, FBI, Department of Homeland Security. Their main task is to break us up. 1905, here we go. This is great. This is one of my favorite moments from this timeline. Herbert Fitch of the Special Branch, a cop, a detective. He hides in a cupboard during a meeting of foreign barbers of Islington. He hears Lenin call for the killing off of the bourgeoisie. Days later, he pretends to be a waiter in another meeting, this time featuring Lenin and Trotsky. This is 1905, okay? This is 12 years before the Russian Revolution. Lenin and Trotsky are together in London, agitating, right? As they should. They take a vote on fomenting revolution in Russia, which passes. Then Lenin declares that perhaps in 10 years, the revolutionaries shall have killed off all the bourgeoisie and the world shall be free. It didn't happen, but that's an interesting thought. In 10 years, there's a dispute that this ever happened, but it looks consistent with the patterns of infiltration and with Lenin and in our message still today as revolutionaries, as leftists, communists, socialists, anarchists. Um, in 10 years, the revolutionaries shall have killed off all the bourgeoisie and the world shall be free. Over 100 years later, I guess we're still working on it. 1907, Mexico and the U.S. governor of Chihuahua. So now Mexico, the Mexican government, the U.S. government are working together. They hire Thomas Furlong, who's another detective, right? So we see private investigators are infiltrating us. He was supposed to track down the Flores Magon brothers, who are anarchist revolutionaries, right? So when we think of the Mexican Revolution and Mexican revolutionaries, there's always Zapata, Emilio Zapata, and Pancho Villa, right? But now we see there was also anarchists at that time. Again, 1908. Yes, this is after the McKinley assassination, and they're cracking down 7 years later. Theodore Roosevelt says, when compared with suppression of anarchy, every other question sinks into significance. Now, comrades, how do we have these bourgeois motherfuckers pretending they don't know what Antifa is? When Antifa is, it's a black bloc anarchist tendency, a leftist tendency, and in 1908, the president was concerned about suppressing anarchists who wanted to abolish capitalism and class society. Okay, going into the 1910s, we're going to go up to around 1920 here. So in the U.S., Charles Lively, union mine worker, claims that this was the year he began working for the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. So we saw the Pinkertons, now the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. Sometime after 1910, Lively became active in the Western Federation of Miners. First, as a so again, like Malinowski, these guys infiltrate. They're members. They're down for the cause, and they get access. So he was sent to infiltrate the United Mine Workers of America in Colorado to investigate a murder committed by a union member. He became vice president. Look how good these guys are. You know, that's why when you guys talk about the PSL, the ACP, the RCP, the DSA, comrades, they are every day targeted for infiltration. They are most likely, we can assume that they are infiltrated. And if we ourselves start a revolutionary organization, it will be infiltrated. This is why we need to practice things like security culture, knowing where people are come from, knowing where people get their money, right? Doing background checks, trusting our gut, trusting our emotional safety, not being manipulated, not being pushed into things. Okay, so uh, he's Baldwin Felts Agency, Charles Lively. He becomes vice president of the local union. He helps arrest Jonathan Flockhart for this murder. In 1914, he shot a striking miner and was arrested. In jail, he obtained further information on the activities. It was to this end that Albert Felts, co-owner of the detective agency, extended his prison time to 16 months. Around 1920, so 1914 to 1920. So these guys, in all of our organizations, in the unions, everywhere, we have long term agents and long term confidential informants. They are working for the FBI, they're working for private security agencies, they're working for the police, for Homeland Security, etc., right? For the CIA. This is a given, you guys. I'm trying to show you class society is always infiltrated. So, sorry. During this year, there was a shootout between pro-union mine workers and detectives from Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. After the shootout, in which Albert Felts and his brother were killed, Lively assisted union members in planning violent actions. They always want you to do something violent, right? And you'll see there's so many videos I've seen, and we'll get to the quotes later in a future episode. But there's this tendency. Actually, it might be one of the quotes from this era. This constant tendency by the authorities to provoke arrestable actions, to provoke violence, provoke chaos, provoke outbursts. Right? Every time you see these MAGA Klan freaks talking about the protest against ICE, they're rioting. Black Lives Matter, riot, 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 riot. Well, you see, going back to ancient times, the government has done everything to entrap, to instigate this stuff. And with the Russian Okhrana, and these private detective agencies in America, and with the in the UK, government and private agencies have instigated violence, right? In order to invalidate and arrest these anti-bourgeois movements. So, Sid Hatfield, he's one of the heroes of this. In 1921, he's a pro-union cop, guys. Now that's fucking this would make a good movie, huh? In 1921, the pro-union sheriff Sid Hatfield and his deputy Edward Chambers were indicted for shooting up a mining camp. Lively supplied the evidence for the prosecution. When Hatfield and Chambers exited the court, they were shot and killed on the courthouse steps by Lively and other Baldwin Felts detectives. Okay, so cops can get it too. Anybody who takes the side against the bourgeoisie can get it. Okay, we're almost finished here. We're coming up to the 1920s. So, 1917, 1918, after the Russian Revolution, the U.S. Espionage and Sedition Act. Well, that's kind of like what they're doing today, right? Anything against ICE, anything against Trump, anything against the government, right? Is espionage, sedition, and what is the definition of espionage? Who decides that? Cops and judges, right? The ruling class decides that. So that means, anyways, we'll keep going here. One of my favorite quotes here, 1918, after the Russian Revolution, Secretary of State Lansing stated that Lenin was appealing to the proletariat of all countries, to the ignorant and mentally deficient who by their numbers are urged to become masters. Here seems to me to lie a very real danger in view of the present social unrest throughout the world. 1918, over 100 years ago, comrades, we see that the ruling class is very much aware of the danger of us, the danger of Marxism, the danger of communism, the danger of the Bolsheviks. To say, we have had enough, we, the proletariat, who he refers to as ignorant and mentally deficient, will become our own masters, and they were deathly afraid of it. In 1918, U.S. military intelligence shifts from Germans to anarchism. So during World War I, the Kaiser von Wilhelm and the Germans were the enemy. And we'll see with goddamn Palmer, the Palmer raids, right? A. Mitchell Palmer, we're going to see, got his start during the war, seizing the assets of foreigners. So basically, like, cops pull you over on some suspicious shit, they take your shit, you're never going to get it back. So because they say, oh, you look like a drug dealer. So we see the war against Germany shifts to the war against the left here in America. So U.S. military intelligence shifts from Germans to anarchism, communism, black militancy. 1918. Comrades, have you ever heard anyone talk about the problem of black militancy in 1918? No, but it was there. And we're going to see W.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, any black folks who didn't want to be lynched, black folks who didn't want to be murdered, right? People who didn't want to see their towns burned down and destroyed by the Klan. They are a threat to the U.S. ruling class. IWW and Japanese influence. God forbid, nobody knows what the fuck that means. Anime? But that was an issue back then. IWW was the International Workers of the World. They were a threat to power because they would unionize everybody. Men, women, black, white, didn't matter. 1918, U.S. Arthur Ulysses Craig was a black male, begins reporting for the FBI on the Liberty League and other new organizations seeking change in the racial status quo and decolonization of Africa. So by 19, right, we saw in the slavery days, they had these policies to promote snitching, to promote informing. And now we see 1918, we're going to see, everybody knows COINTELPRO, Fred Hampton, you know, they infiltrated Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. 1918, they're already doing that. The Roaring Twenties. After World War I, before World War II, before Hitler. So, 1919, Hoover. Before Hoover starts the FBI, before there is a FBI, Hoover says the Reds have done a vast amount of evil damage by carrying the doctrine of race revolt and the poison of Bolshevism to black folks. The doctrine of race revolt, because this was the era of the KKK. So he means race revolt means fighting back and defending yourself, right? And this is when FBI surveilling, spying on, infiltrating black community groups. But it was the Office of General Intelligence, I believe, at that time. Yeah, Palmer raids. We're gonna get there. So 1919. We're gonna stop at around 1920 here, guys. It's a lot. You see how much the infiltration is, comrades. That's why now we got the phone infiltrating us, but there's still agents. A lot of the Instagram accounts, right, are the feds. In our groups, a lot of the leaders might be feds. We don't know unless we have security culture, unless we look to see who the person is and not just the ideology, not just the hype, right? So, Hoover. Yes, sorry. Yes. They begin surveilling, infiltrating black community groups. 1919, Hoover orders all FBI offices to give weekly reports on the radical activities, including Bolshevik, anarchist, and socialist activities, labor unions and strikes, militant activities of Japanese, Mexican, Sinn Feiners, those are the Irish nationalists, the Fenians, and Hindus, plus so-called Negro activities and the so-called Negro press, the FBI. They were spying on everybody. 1919, over 100 years ago, comrades. So again, every day the fascists, the bigots, the Klan fakes are going to pretend they never heard of the left. But all they care about is defeating the left. That's why it sounds hyperbolic for us to say fascism. No, fascism is when we go too far to the left. That's all it is. So 1919, Hoover gets his start from A. Mitchell Palmer. A. Mitchell Palmer got his start seizing assets of foreigners during World War One. So now they're going to go after all the anarchists, communists, and socialists, and they're tying that together with immigration. So Palmer names the 24-year-old Hoover to a new division of the Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation. Oh, the General Intelligence Division. That's what becomes the FBI. So they're investigating programs of radical groups and identifying their members. 1919, Jonathan F. Byrne, I believe he was a senator, speaking about the black population, says they are being influenced by the IWW, meaning the anarchist labor organizers, and Bolsheviks to earn privileges they feel entitled to, like the right not to get lynched, the right not to live as second-class citizens. You understand? Where what is this? Where for 20 years, 30 years before the civil, or 30 years before the civil rights movement, or 40 years before the civil rights movement. Yeah, because it's 60. 40 years before the civil rights movement, and already they're really concerned about black folks not wanting to live in Klan country. So John Burns says this is a white man's country. He says the IWW, the anarchist labor organizers, and the Bolsheviks are riling them up. This is a white man's country and will always remain a white man's country. As to social equality, God Almighty never intended it. Now, brothers and sisters, in this Trump administration, don't we know that they feel the same way? We see the Democrats will have token minorities, tokens of diversity, but don't the Republicans feel the same way today? This is a white man's country. Stop. We don't have to apologize for being white. 1919, U.S. Palmer, in the U.S., Palmer, A. Mitchell Palmer says to Congress, from the date of the signing of the armistice, a wave of radicalism appears to have swept over the country, a well-concerted movement among a certain class of Negro leaders of thought and action to constitute themselves a determined and persistent course of radical opposition to the government and to the established rule of law, and defiance and insolently race-centered condemnation of the white race to be met in every issue of the more radical publications. They were really concerned about black folks wanting to have equal rights and not wanting to get lynched, homie. This is America, right? This is America. You get me? So, 1990, U.S. military intelligence. We don't hear about military intelligence, but I guarantee you military intelligence is still at it. They're probably still watching us. They might be listening to Poet Theater right now under my bed. 1990, a military intelligence department summary on recent, quote, Negro subversion. Again, IWW, the anarchist organizers. IWW and other radicalization organizations, both white and black, have played their part in inciting the Negroes to the recent outbreaks in Chicago and Washington. Agitators have played upon the feelings of resentment against injustices or fancied injustices suffered by the Negro soldiers during the war. Well, during the war, this black soldiers were treated like shit. They were preyed upon, beaten, killed, and they weren't allowed to, have any command positions. I don't think if they were even allowed to fight at that time. And so they might have had reason to prefer better treatment, right? So this is what they're concerned about. So he says the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People had an important part in this. A Negro woman representing this organization is said to have exhorted Negro men at a meeting held several months ago in Washington to go with shotguns in hand and demand what you want. Now, brothers and sisters, looking back at this time from our 2025 perspective as woke leftist revolutionaries, we agree with that woman, right? From then to today, the government is deathly afraid of that. You will see with the Black Panthers, when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, that's why they started banning guns, because the Black Panthers exercised their Second Amendment right. Well, the right doesn't like your Second Amendment right when you have melanin and you're not a fascist, right? So we'll also see that. Oh wait, hold on. Okay. We're almost done here. Okay, we're gonna end with the 1920s here. Ross D. Brown is on the lecture circuit, 1920s, 1920. Okay, he's on the lecture circuit talking about capitalism, the curse of the world. This was an African American man. Capitalism, the curse of the world. socialism the solution. So he's going around the black community saying socialism is the answer to capitalism. So again, nowadays we have this idea, the difference between race and class and all this stupid bullshit and the white working class and all this bullshit. But you see, black folks, Mexicans, women, the so-called minorities, the third world, those that are colonized, have always been keen to get rid of capitalism and understanding that socialism, solidarity, workers' organization is the answer to capitalism, right? Uh, FBI field agents instruct police to keep a close eye on him. So they're telling the cops to watch this guy. And we'll see. So from the 1920s to the Black Panthers, then to the Black Lives Matter movement, in 2017, 2018, around that time, the FBI came out with this category, Black Identity Extremist. Black Lives Matter was not even militant. They ended up, the leadership became these bourgeois people talking about reforms and the what is it, the prison pipeline or whatever, the mass industrial, they wanted to reform the prison system, okay? Mass incarceration. But you'll see from 1920 to the 1960s and 70s, then to 2016, it doesn't stop, right? The African American population has been treated as an underclass, and so is a constant threat anytime they want to assert themselves against the white majority or the white ruling class. 1920, a lot happened in 1920. U.S. Military Intelligence Department warns that Soviet diplomat Ludwig Martins was fostering uprisings by black people, Polynesians, and other oppressed populations. And this was around the time that the U.S. was colonizing Hawaii, too. So, yeah, they are deathly afraid of these so-called minorities rising up and wanting equal treatment, wanting what the white man supposedly has, wanting what the white ruling class does have, right? It's 1920 still. The Military Intelligence Department says of the NAACP. NAACP is still around today. Very liberal, democratic organization. It says this organization has been particularly offensive throughout the country in its teachings of social equality for the Negro and in attempting to stay the hand of justice in numerous cases where Negroes have been accused of crime. So at that time, the NAACP was fighting to end lynching and outlaw segregation. So that's why during the civil rights movement, right, 40 years later, 40 years later, right, we see people were getting killed and people were getting murdered. So even bringing it up at this time, right, it was even more insane. And he says they've attempted to stay the hand of justice in numerous cases where Negroes have been accused of crime, meaning they were fighting back against blacks being falsely accused and being lynched, right? So this is what the military that's why you guys see all this stuff. Secret agents, and I was undercover. I stopped Al Qaeda, and there's this guy. What the hell? Everyday spy. He's got long curly hair. Andrew something, and he's always like, and what the CIA knows. And here's the tips and tricks. All they're doing is suppressing the working class. All they're doing is suppressing the colonies. All right, 1920 to 21. Herbert S. Boulon provides the FBI with much of their information on radicalism in New York. He's another African American man, so he was informant for the FBI. 1921, the Tulsa Massacre happens. The Communist Party releases a pamphlet on the Tulsa Massacre, obviously saying it's capitalism, it's racism, and we should fight back and end it. The FBI struggles to suppress it and manages to threaten people distributing it with jail. So for even talking about the Tulsa Massacre, for naming the problem of white supremacy, for naming the problem of capitalist hegemony, you could go to jail. They don't play, homie. 1922, in the U.S., the NAACP officials assisted the FBI in obtaining information to use against Marcus Garvey. The FBI was eager to find a pretext to prosecute him. Why? Marcus Garvey was not a socialist. Marcus Garvey was a Christian, a misogynist. He had chauvinist ideas towards Africa. He was anti-union, but he mobilized black folks outside of the white power structure. He mobilized black folks to have a sense of common collective interest and a Pan-African sense of interest across the colonies, right? So he had to be stopped. In 1923, NAACP provides informant to FBI to attend UNIA meetings. I believe that was Marcus Garvey's organization. At this time, they wanted to arrest Marcus Garvey. Okay. Oh, you guys, we have been infiltrated and we are infiltrated. I want us to understand that it's not amorphous. It's not scary. Like just right now on my Instagram, I had this guy doing this typical thing of trying to get any kind of drama going. Now, we can say that's a troll. And that is what trolls do, but that's also what cops do. It's the same thing. And the cops and the trolls are of the same mind, which is white supremacy, capitalism, misogyny, right? Ableism, transphobia, homophobia, right? The trolls and the cops are the same community. ICE, right? The gentrifiers, the developers, the human resources, the bourgeoisie, the millionaires, Trump, they're all in the same community. Hate, oppression, lies, confusion. So maybe when we finish this series, I might do a follow up about cases of suspected infiltration in my own experience as an activist. But look, guys, so far we've gone from antiquity, from like 300 BC, all the way to 1930, and we see oppression, intelligence infiltration is always here, spying is always here, and the ruling class is always infiltrating the lower classes out of fear that the lower class will do the rightful, logical thing and fight back. I was just reading George Jackson, Blood in My Eye, here, 1971. He was a prison organizer, Black Panther, and he said, there is nothing for the slave to do but to revolt. And if you think about it, when we're oppressed, what are we going to do? Either we are obeying our oppression or we're fighting back. Anything we do that's not fighting our oppression is going along with staying oppressed, going along with our oppression, staying in that prison cell they make for us of rules and norms and invisible intimidation. Okay. All right, guys, that's Poet of Theater, Timeline of Infiltration, Part 5. That was 1900 to 1930. So it's crazy. It gets crazy, but we see from the 1840s until today, the ruling class of every capitalist country has been trying to infiltrate and suppress the anarchists, the socialists, the communists, the colonized who want to be free, and the feminists. Solidarity, comrades.